Well, hello, everyone. I'm Cristina Tardáguila, the Associate Director of the International Fact-Checking Network, and this is the second edition of IFCN Talks. This meeting is being held every month, and it brings together fact-checkers from across the world. So today, our topic is a very interesting one. We are talking about regulation attempts and how that can affect our community, right? So we have here two wonderful friends and wonderful fact checkers. One is Peter Bodkin. He's joining us from the future. He's already in March 4th. Amazing. And he's coming, is connecting with us from Australia. And I want to say hello, Peter. He is the editor of AAP Fact Check. You want to say something, Peter, very quickly?
Yeah, good morning, good evening, good night, everyone. I'm the editor with AAP Fact Check based in Sydney, Australia. So we cover Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands with our fact checking operations. So glad to be here. It's an interesting topic, so happy to get into it.
And isn't he lucky to be in Sydney? Oh my God, I really wish I can be there one day. Hey, Tania Montalvo, my really, really good friend, is connecting with us from Mexico City and has done a great work as the Deputy Editorial Director of Político. And it's been, what, 4 years since you've been working with fact-checking, Tania? Say hello to us.
Hey, how are you? Thank you for having me. Thank you for this conversation. Yes, I'm working in Animal Político with our fact-checking project El Sabueso that started in 2015. Yes, thank you.
A lot of work, I bet. So many difficult situations in Latin America, as you know. So thank you too for coming, and thank you for being our audience today. And this session is being recorded, and the video will be uploaded to IFCN's YouTube channel. So be aware of this, and if you have to leave, if it's too late for you, you can rewatch our conversation later and share that too on social media. So going to our topic, as you know, this IFCN talk will be about regulation attempts and how they either can or have affected fact checkers on the ground. And we bring two today. The IFCN believes it is responsible for raising awareness about these incidents and giving the community a space to discuss this topic with the public. Well, we all saw that there was this battle, let's call it battle, between Facebook and the Australian government a couple of weeks ago. And that seems like an ongoing story, as we are all following the story, right? But there is a fact here. None of us can deny that Australians fact checkers were caught in the middle of a fight. And that fight wasn't actually theirs. And they kind of are here today to tell us how that situation affected their fact-checking process, their routines, and so on and so forth. In Mexico, on the other hand, at the same time, President Manuel López Obrador seems to be preparing a law that aims to give the government the power to have the final word about what should be taken down from social media platforms. So hear this. Yes, there is this president thinking that he can move forward with a law regulation to have that power. So I have some questions for both of them, and for sure, this is an informal conversation. We agree that everyone can join and can pop in and discuss stuff. Please also start sending your questions, your comments in the Q&A box. Ferdi is taking care of that, and after about 30 minutes, we will start taking questions from there. So anytime you want to comment something, make sure that you send it over so we can use your information. And I know that many other countries in the planet, and my country, Brazil, is also discussing regulation. So yes, we want to hear from you. So can we start with Peter? Yeah. So this is for you, Peter. Can you describe how exactly was the moment you and your team found out that you just couldn't use AAP Facebook page to post your fact checks and your articles? How was that like? And what were the first impressions and first decisions that your team made? Can you share that moment with us?
Sure. Yeah. So the change that Facebook made was without warning and affected all publishers similarly, in that it took everyone by surprise. I think the first that most people found out about it would have been either when they tried to post something to Facebook, or from somewhere like Twitter, seeing people talking about this. So personally, the first that I heard about it was seeing on Twitter people complaining that they weren't able to post to Facebook. I quickly tested to see if there was anything that we could do, whether our fact checks could be shared or if we could post from our own profiles. Discovered that we couldn't. We immediately contacted Facebook to see if it was an intentional ban, given that we're not a news publisher per se, and the idea of these laws that were being introduced in Australia were to make Facebook and Google and other digital platforms pay for news content that was being shared. So while we're waiting for a response to that, I think the main steps that we were taking were keeping people updated via social media. So I was tweeting, for example, letting people know how fact-checking was affected, and essentially advocating for the work that we do. I think it was very much a situation where fact-checking was caught up as collateral damage in a much bigger fight that was going on between the government and between the digital platforms. As I said, Facebook's move kind of came without warning. They took quite a different approach to it to Google, who chose to strike deals rather than making this kind of big public statement by showing what would happen if they took news away from their platform. We didn't know at that time how long it would last. Our best guess was that there would be a compromise at some stage and the ability to share would be reinstated for everyone. But obviously it was a concern for us, both in terms of our own operation, being able to distribute our fact checks widely, but also from a perspective of the general prevention of misinformation spreading on Facebook. While our third-party fact-checking agreement with Facebook wasn't affected, you could still see our fact checks attached to particular posts. There was an obvious issue with users, both in Australia and internationally, not being able to share our fact checks when they saw misinformation and call it out as they saw it themselves. So at the start, it was very much a case of kind of wait and see how long this was going to last for, try and get some more information from Facebook, and then come up with a plan from there. Wow.
I like the idea of collateral damage. I think that describes perfectly what I wanted to say, that this is a battle that isn't yours, you're caught in the middle. That's perfect. And I was wondering, just before I move on to Tania, Peter, how big is your Facebook page in the general distribution of your fact checks? Is it really relevant? Is it big? You usually use it a lot?
It hasn't historically been a big part of our distribution strategy. So, we are obviously, like all fact checkers, are really interested in getting our fact checks out to as many people as possible. But we're probably more reliant on the distribution we get from our Facebook third-party agreement than we are from sharing on Facebook. But that said, I mean, it's obviously an important part of what we do, getting our stuff out to as many people as possible on Facebook. And if that was to be an ongoing issue, then that would have been a big concern for us. And we're always looking at ways to diversify how we share our content, but that was definitely a catalyst for being more aware and reassessing our reliance on any one platform, not just Facebook, to make sure that we have as much control as possible over how our fact checks are distributed.
Yeah, I love that idea of we need to be more diverse and be aware that things can happen to platforms and maybe we're not controlling everything. Tania, your turn now. Can you please do me a favor and explain what does Andrés Manuel López Obrador want to do? Can you describe a little bit of what is his idea and what are the chances of this going forward?
Yes, What is happening in Mexico? Well, when you mentioned that Andrés Manuel López Obrador is trying to make changes of this social media, what is happening is that Ricardo Monreal, he's head of the group of senators here in Mexico, and he's head of senators from the ruling party, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador party, Morena. And he's proposing regulating major social media networks, including Twitter and Facebook. And the principal argument is to protect freedom of expression. The argument is that private companies have the right now, they have the right to put down or suspend an account from any citizen in any moment without explaining why. And they said, well, that this is eliminating content and violating the freedom of speech. Maybe that sounds reasonable, right? The thing is, of course, we all want transparency, but the proposal, what it's doing is that says that any social network with on internet or internet service with more than 1 million users or reach needs to ask for permission to operate to a state regulator. They are saying that this regulator is actually the one that should decide which content can be online or offline. The proposal, for example, says that any message or account in any social network could be deleted if, according to the state regulator, this state regulator violates private rights, attacks moral or good behavior, or if they publish fake news. Until now, we don't clearly know what actually that means. You know, what is fake news or what is good behavior? And if a user or a social media actually violate these, they could be fined of about $4 million, for example. Morena, this party, has a majority in the Congress. Sometimes for them, it's not so hard to move their initiatives, polemic initiatives. But what happened is that civil society actually was very critical about this. So Ricardo Monreal said that maybe he will discuss in an open discussion, in an open parliament, you know, with experts and with civil society, the terms of this initiative. And he said that maybe in 3 weeks, he will wait 3 weeks to present this initiative and talk more about it. Actually, today or tomorrow, that 3 weeks period comes to an end. So we don't clearly know if in those days he will present this initiative, the discussion with civil society actually will begin, or what will happen. The thing is that this state regulator already exists. You know, it's like a telecommunication regulator, you know, like there is no enterprise that monopolizes all the telecommunication system or something like that. And they are trying to convert this regulator in the one who decides if something is fake news or if something is against moral or against good behavior. But what is good behavior? And also why,
Wow.
you know, like a state regulator will say like one user in a specific social network, it's actually violating this good behavior or these
Wow.
moral statements.
Hey, Tania, this reminds me a bit of what has happened in Brazil, what's going on in Brazil, but also I see we have Philippines, France here. It kind of sounds what Duterte is trying to do also there. I'd love to hear from the Philippines, like how is their law going? I know they had something that looks like that. So in easy terms, let's say López Obrador approves this law, right? So you are a third-party fact-checking partner. You tell Facebook what is false and what is true. And based on that, sometimes Facebook can take down something, right? Not every day. It's not very common, but it could happen. So in that sense, so you would tell Facebook, and then Facebook would tell this authority from the government, and then this authority would decide over the work of these two entities, meaning Facebook and Animal Político, whether something is violating or the morale, or is that how it's planned to be?
Yes, kind of.
Wow.
Because I don't know if there is something in I don't know, you are publishing something on social media, and someone actually decides that it's fake news, so they can go to this state regulator and say this account is moving fake news. So the state regulator have to decide if it is or is not fake news and order the social network to put it down. And in the opposite way, if, for example, Twitter, Facebook, I don't know, they detect some hate speech, in social media, before saying this is hate speech, I need to put it down. They need to ask to this state regulator, like, okay, this is hate speech, this is happening. May I have the permission of you, regulator, to put it down or to do something about it? Or because maybe the state regulator said, like, no, you can do it because maybe it's hate speech, but it's also freedom of speech, something like that. So yes, I mean, this state regulator is the base of everything, of deciding what is online or what is offline.
Wow, that's big. Peter, I'm going to ask you the second question, but I really want to hear, like, how do you, from a super developed country, how do you see that? I keep thinking about it. But then let me jump to your second question, Peter. How long did the ban last? And finally, and what exactly did you do in AAP to overcome, the distribution? Because the distribution is for sure something that all fact checkers are worried about. We need to reach more people, more audience. Did you do anything different? Like I think RMIT launched an AA app to distribute their fact checks. Did you do like, I don't know, maybe a newsletter? Did you put money in ads in other social media networks? How was distribution during those days?
So the ban lasted for around a week in the end, maybe slightly less. And we didn't fundamentally change any of our strategies on the basis of that, primarily because we took a kind of wait and see approach. And we, as I mentioned before, were not overly dependent on Facebook sharing as a means of distribution. But that said, it definitely did make us speed up other decisions that we were making or ideas that we were formulating around distribution. So looking at things like newsletters, video as a means of repurposing, distributing fact checks, third-party publishing partnerships. So AAP Fact Check is part of AAP, which is the national newswire service in Australia, which means we have existing relationships with a number of major publishers, both print, online, broadcast media as well. So there's always potential there to work with people who have other distribution channels to help get our work out there, and that's something which we've been doing for a number of years, but certainly planning around that and broadening the scope of what we can do with other organisations is something that we put a lot more thought into in the context of this ban. I think in a way it's been a positive thing for some publishers here because it has given people a shake and made them realise that if they were extremely dependent on Facebook for distribution, that plug can be pulled. So you need to have a plan B if that's your plan A.
Well, I think that's a great point. I mean, out of these craziness, you learned the lesson, right? You can't rely too much in one platform, and you have to be prepared in case something happens, correct? And that's a great way of seeing this, Peter. And don't run away from the other question. How do you see a Mexico situation? I mean, really, like from this beautiful Australian land, how do you see Latin America moving towards that direction? And I'll ask you the same, Tania, about the Australian law.
Well, I mean, in general, the laws here around things like misinformation, even hate speech, are quite lax or non-existent. So there are no real laws around misinformation. Everything is done on a kind of platform basis, and then you have organisations like ours ABC RMIT fact check, like you mentioned, doing fact checking work. My personal opinion is that is a good approach. I don't know if governments should be in the business of policing what is misinformation. But that said, I think more could potentially be done to bring some of the platforms to the table and get them to be more proactive in, if not taking down misinformation, then at least doing things like partnering with fact-checking organisations to make sure that if people see misinformation, that's countered with correct information. But my perspective from a country that doesn't have very kind of hands-on laws around misinformation is I would be concerned if the government was, bringing in a heavy hand when it comes to deciding what is and isn't misinformation. I think there's a lot of potential there for censorship and just shutting down things which may not suit the government, but have there's no factual basis to that.
I think the word censorship always comes in discussions like the one we're having here. Right, Tania, it's really close. I mean, we can easily see how, at least in Latin America, we could easily see how a law like that could become a censorship, situation. And I see some Brazilian friends in the chat. Hello, Brazilian friends. I really hope you comment on our law too, because you probably know much more than I do about it. And maybe we can compare with the Mexican situation. So shoot a question in the Q&A and I'll get to them as soon as possible. So Tania, I want to understand, like, let's say tomorrow the president approves this law. And how is this going to impact your daily routine? Do you think you're going to receive more or less things to fact check? Do you think your fact check will be more distributed or less distributed? How is this going to impact if it becomes reality?
Well, I think that, we are living in a polarized world, Mexico is not a section. So I think that what is happening now is that we have right now a government saying all the time that the press is fake news, With this, I think that it could be easier to state agencies to indicate, even with no further argument, that the press lies or that something is fake, because you are doing critical journalism, because you are doing fact checking, because you are being critical with government, because right now in Mexico we are living like this scenario in which if you are a critical journalist or if you are a fact checker, it's easier that these state agencies said like you are against a better country, For example, right now in Mexico, and I think it's the same scenario in other countries, we have a fact-checking state agency that actually operates with public resources and from the public media direction. And
hey, can I ask you to explain that a little bit, because this is really, really interesting, and this might resonate to our friends in Asia. I've been there. Yes. I know there are some countries that also have like governmental fact-checking organizations. Yes. Can you talk a bit about Verificado in Notimex?
In fact, Verificado and Notimex, they don't exist because they are on strike, but we have a new one that it's called Infodemia, that it's part of public media, and they are operating with public resources, and they have a lot of influence on public media, in radio, in TV. So what they are doing, they are, for example, fact-checking media or fact-checking fact-checkers, but without methodology or without anything. I mean, if there, for example, the New York Times publishing like something is going wrong with the pandemic, and what it's doing, these state agencies like the New York Times, it's fake news because the president or this authority denies what they publish, and that's it.
Okay,
it's not
great
like
source.
Yes, it's not that they are checking something. So we are in that scenario, So if we now are asking to social media platforms to ask permission for operate and to ask permission to to use it, like for us as users to use the social media, this phenomenon of saying that something is fake only because someone, an authority
Denied
said
it.
that it's
Yeah.
denied. It's like more easy to have this against freedom of the speech,
Do
because
you think there is any chance that this governmental entity that might be created or developed could bring down content from Animal Político as if it was considered falsehood?
No, I don't
No.
know. Maybe no.
Worst case scenario.
Yes, maybe no. But the thing is that Animal Político, as third-party fact checker, we are all the time receiving these messages that you are the censor of Facebook. Like, and sometimes it's a lot of confusion about what actually we are doing on Facebook or we are doing as fact checkers or as third-party fact checkers, like it's very easy for someone that actually violates the rules of Facebook and they receive a notification from Facebook saying like you are violating our social rules to say Animal Político censors. Because for Animal Político it's like, no, I don't have the power over Facebook to eliminate your profile. It's not what we are doing.
Yeah.
But all this rhetoric, of course, polarization against the one that is critical to the regime, it's very, very complicated. And with this new regulation in hands of a state regulator, it's like, boom.
Yeah, I wonder if there are any friends here from Thailand or maybe from Singapore or from India that could share a bit on the chat or in the Q&A, like how their situation is going now. Maybe also from Indonesia. I know that there has been some laws there, and Malaysia also. So going to that point and trying to connect with the information that you said, it's what is that, Infodemia? If the name of the new organization, Tania, Infodemia?
Yes.
Okay.
Infodemia
So
MX, I think.
okay, so in that sense, I want to connect with Peter again to say that there are some, and I know that, for example, in Argentina there is no audio, it's no hate. It's also a attempted regulatory governmental body to regulate mis and disinformation regarding COVID. So I want to hear from Peter. Like, we are seeing how Asia, Southeast Asia especially, they started to try to regulate. We saw how people were even arrested there in Thailand, in other countries, and now we're seeing how this is being exported to Latin America. And I heard you saying that you would feel a little bit worried about governmental, governments touching, regulation. So do you have any idea, like, since you're discussing social media and news in Australia seems to be on the battle, and I bet there are so many opinion articles about this, how would a good law, a good regulation, a reasonable one look like? Do you have any idea, any suggestions that you might bring to the rest of the planet, since you've been discussing news and social media for a long time?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of pieces here. So we have the media code is the set of laws that the government and the social media platforms and Google have clashed heads over, and that's about making these big digital companies essentially pay media companies. That's something which broadly AAP as an organisation was in favour of, even though we don't directly benefit from it, being a wholesale provider of news rather than a publisher per se, except for our fact checking. I mean, as a general principle, we have been in favour of anything that puts more money into journalism, because we see that as being both positive for us, but also a public good. I think some of the concerns that were raised by Facebook around these laws are probably valid, in that they were drafted in a very broad way. So things that maybe the public wouldn't consider news would still technically be covered under the laws, and therefore they would become, there would be a chilling effect, I suppose, on the general dissemination of information to the public via platforms like Facebook and Google. And that would be a big concern for us. And the other thing that's happened here is recently, last month, a industry code was introduced. This is a code specifically around disinformation and misinformation. And the industry group that formulated that is made up of really all of the big tech players: Google, Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, several others. And that's a voluntary code. So they, several of them have committed to it, and a positive effect of that, I suppose, or positive element of that is that it does specifically mention fact-checking, the potential of partnering with fact-checking as being a good way to limit the spread of misinformation and combat it. But it is an industry code only. So other than a general commitment, there's nothing binding in it. So if organisations say don't adhere to it, there are no penalties, and there's nothing to obligate these players to sign up to it. So not every social network, for example, is a signatory. So I mean, that's a positive development, something that AAP Fact Check put in submissions to, and were there advocating for fact checking. We're generally supportive of that, but it is worth noting that there's nothing really enforceable in that code as well, which is a potential flaw with it.
Yeah, Tania, and I think I want to ask you the same question. Like, how is there a reasonable law that maybe fact checkers could help build? And in relation to what Peter was saying, it kind of remind me the European code that is now being discussed, and I think even some members of the IFCN the verified signatories of the IFCN are part of the commission. And the advisory idea is something that has been around at least for a couple of years, since the high-level group in the EU discussed falsehoods, fake news, and stuff. So what do you see from your perspective? What is first, do we need regulation? Second, what would a reasonable regulation look like for you?
Well, I think that any country needs transparency from social media platforms. I think that that's something that we need actually talk about, because it's true that we need to know exactly why an account is suspended and to understand the terms of that, because sometimes there is it's not clear what's happening, if there is political or there is which terms are behind those decisions. That's very clear. But I also think that we cannot ban the consumer or the citizen that reads and wrongly shares or believes something, For example, here in Mexico, we have cases. We have cases from political parties that they are paying to create and to distribute fake news against opponents, like they are paying to a company to create fake news and to boost it on Google or on Facebook. We have like investigation from the electoral authority that political parties are doing that. But with that investigation, nothing happened, like the party was not, it's doing it, the candidates, they are doing it, the political are doing it, and nothing happened. So thinking about that, and which is the origin, the real origin of this disinformation and the consequences, of course, is the solution going after a user that share and maybe also to setting him a fine because the user is reading and sharing? I don't think so. Of course, we need to work with readers in collaboration, in education, and that kind of things that maybe it's another debate, but we cannot avoid the origin of the disinformation and the real, not only the real origin, but also which is the objective of this disinformation and who is behind. Because if we are against the user, we are just moving in a fight that is completely absurd.
Right. Yeah, so, I mean, it's really, really tough to discuss this, but I wonder, do you think, and that last question for you too, so we jump to the Q&A. Do you think fact checkers, and I mean, not your organizations only, but the community could play a bigger role in these discussions, and how should we do that? I mean, it's an opinion. What do you see that? Peter, can we start with you since Tania last talked?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that fact checkers should be as involved as possible and as vocal as possible in any regulation or initiatives that potentially affect our work for good or ill. I think something that we've always tried to do is, if there is, say, a government inquiry that touches on issues like misinformation or fact checking, we always try to make submissions. We've appeared at a few recent inquiries that have touched on some of these issues. So that's one part, I think, kind of directly making our case to decision making. As I think Tania touched on there earlier, sometimes there are misconceptions both in the public and amongst politicians around what fact checking is, how it works. And I think an important part of getting in front of the people who are making decisions is clarifying any misconceptions. So if there is a misconception, for example, that we have a censorship kind of role with our Facebook relationships, making clear that our job is not to censor, our job is to inform. Facebook makes its own independent decisions around what accounts are suspended, what information is taken down, all of those kind of things. So I think, educating is a big part of being a fact checker and helping people understand our work, the positive role that it can play. And then when there is the potential for regulation to be introduced that will touch on our work, being very vocal about what it is that we want, what we think will work, and we are and should be the experts in this field. So we want to share that expertise and make sure that people understand the potential impacts of something that they may be doing.
I love what you're saying. I think, I mean, at least this is something that I've been trying to do personally, not even as the IFCN, just as a fact checker. When Brazil started to discuss a bill about how to regulate disinformation, and they kept using, for example, the term fake news. And then I jumped in and say, hey, excuse me, Mr. Congressman, what do you mean by fake news? What is the definition that you are using? And they went like, oh, we kind of didn't think about this. So it's interesting, they try to solve the problem without defining the problem. And I kept saying, so you should think about the definition of fake news before you try to regulate fake news. And that was kind of boom, open-minding for some Brazilian congressmen. And that was just a part of the education that we can offer lawmakers. I think this is a really interesting role that fact checkers can play, but I want to hear Tania. Tania, what do you think fact checkers could do if they should be involved anyhow?
Oh, I think that the first thing is that we need also to work better as fact checkers, as community, in our communication and our transparency. Because sometimes we are not very clear of what we actually are doing. And I think that also there is a mistake that maybe there is a lot of work behind something, like behind fact checking something, but we are not working enough in doing, in being very, a lot of transparent in terms of any citizens who read this actually can fact check in exactly the same way that as we did, because we are like I don't know, sometimes very involved in our we are doing, and we are not thinking in that not all the readers actually understand what we are doing. So when we are not transparent, I think that we are giving kind of impulse at this idea about that we are fact checking only because we are against a politician, or we are against a regime, or we are against something, you know. And I think sometimes as community we are very close to ourselves as community, and we are not involving with other communities, with other areas, in order to expand this activity of fact checking to all journalism, for example, and also to explain to all the people what actually fact checking is. And if I'm saying that something is false because I use this methodology and I check all the sources, clearly say it to the reader in order to the reader to do exactly the same and follow exactly the same way and have the same
conclusion.
Yeah.
And you were just saying something that there was this moment in the Brazilian discussion of the law that they wanted to regulate fact checkers. They developed a let's say a committee to oversee the work of fact checkers. And when I look at that, I said, wait a minute, you don't even understand what fact checkers do. How are you going to oversee what we do? So it was a very, very funny discussion. And I asked very interesting questions. And of course, the congressman just couldn't answer them. And they realized that, fact checkers are journalists mainly. And there is a code for journalism that is already in place in many, many countries, and the ethics code and stuff. So they kind of reviewed that and dropped that idea. But anyhow, the law, the bill that is being proposed, has been approved by the Brazilian Chamber of Deputies, by the Senate, and it's now under the analysis of the Chamber of Deputies. And there is another comment that I want to bring from my country also, is we have seen laws being approved in a state level. So it's not national. And so there are some states in Brazil that are fining disinformers and misinformers once they share content about COVID-19. So it's also interesting to see how a law like that, or how regulations like that, can also bring money to the government, to the authorities. Instead of fining cars at speed race, they now are fining misinformers. But let's jump to the Q&A because we only have 15 minutes left. And I see that we have two questions for you, Tania. Not questions, but more comments. Diego Canavarro, my friend from Brazil, super smart and knows a lot of what's going on in Mexico, and has great Spanish too that I know. He's making a comment about the proposal from López Obrador. He's saying that the telecom regulator would have too much power, and that could affect even the capacity of innovating in such an area if the governmental power had to decide stuff. So how do you see that? And Diego, I made your comment very short, but I hope I got it.
Yes, what is happening is that if we have this telecom regulator, the state regulator, like asking to Twitter or Facebook or any other social network to please give me your terms of services in order to approve, we are like not moving in a very equal and neutral territory on internet, and that's of course affecting the user. It's affecting the internet itself, because the initiative what says is like if you are a social network with 1 million users or 1 million reach, you need to be regulators. And it's why 1 million? What is 1 million? Things like that, like to be clear about why regulate someone or why not regulate others. And the internet not being free or the internet not being neutral, it's very, very complicated. It's not only about an state regulator saying what is fake or what is not fake, or what is good or good behavior or against moral, that our concepts are completely crazy, you know, what is good behavior. And it's also about giving all the power about over the internet at one same state regulator.
Yeah. And anytime has the government reached out to Animal or to any other fact checker in Mexico to hear them and talk to them? Do you have any information about that? No. Is that you didn't have any information, or no, they did not reach?
They did not reach. What is happening? Well, I don't know if that would happen, but in theory, Ricardo Monreal, the author of this initiative, he will open this discussion to civil society and to others in order to hear why it's so wrong, this initiative. But right now we don't know if that actually happened, because I don't know, in other initiatives, even though we have open parliament, it was like completely a joke, because they hear but they did not adopt anything put on the table to the final initiative. Yeah. So we see, because right now the Senate is very focused on other initiatives, like also very initiatives from President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. So let's see if in a couple days or weeks this it's in public debate.
And before I go to Peter with another question about the ban and stuff, I want to read something from Ellen in the Philippines. She's sharing about the law that they have there. They have the anti-terror law. And she's saying that it's against terrorism. And she's saying, oh, what is terrorism, right? And she's shouting out that they are opposing that law, as I understand, as fact checkers, right? And because it gives so much power to security agencies, including military powers, to determine what terrorism is. So 37 groups, including Verifiles, where she's working for, are asking the Supreme Court to declare the law unconstitutional. So we're talking here about a law that has already been approved. And I wonder, Ellen, if you can jump again in the chat for a while and tell us, has the law has already been used in any situation that relates to fact checkers? Or that could be interesting for this conversation. If you have the time and opportunity to describe if that happened already or not, that would be very helpful. Peter, one question that I got here in private for you, the end of the ban, how did that happen? How did you learn about the end of the ban? And was there any agreement between AAP Fact Check and Facebook to go back, to have the page reactivated?
So we learned that the ban was going to be overturned again, I think, like most people, through the media. That Facebook and some media companies announced that they'd struck deals that meant that that the code would no longer be enforced, or would no longer relate to their agreements. And there was still a little bit of confusion about when people would be able to actually share news on Facebook in Australia again. That wasn't clearly communicated at the time, and there was a couple of days lag between when the news of those deals came out and the actual ban was overturned. So that was how we felt. We found out, essentially. We were working ourselves during the period of the ban with Facebook to, I suppose, advocate for ourselves and for fact checkers in general, to say that we weren't news. Particularly in our case, we're not a news publisher at all. We only publish ourselves fact checks. Everything else that we do as a news organisation is published by other parties. So we were essentially making that case and arguing that if there was to be a long-term ban, then we should be exempt from it essentially, and so should other fact checkers.
Yeah, and Peter, in my personal curiosity here, did you measure the impact of the ban over your audience?
We didn't really measure it, other than, I suppose, keeping an eye out for how much of an effect it was taking. I think, as I mentioned before, because we haven't been particularly reliant on Facebook publishing for distribution, I was certainly keeping an eye on it, but we didn't notice a big effect straight away. If there was an enormous drop off, we probably would have been more on top of what was happening and making more urgent plans for alternate distribution methods and so on. But as I said before, it was also, we also had the feeling that this was something that had happened very quickly. There was the potential that things would change. So we did adopt a little bit of a wait and see approach. I think if the ban had lasted for longer than a week, if we were getting into several weeks, months, then that's when we would have started making a lot more urgent contingencies.
Wow. Hey, Peter, am I correct to say that the lesson you learned and that you could share with our communities that get ready or to be blocked and think about other ways of distribution? What would be that in like one sentence?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the lesson is to never be too reliant on any one distribution channel, particularly one that you don't have control over.
I heard you saying, yeah, Tania, at the end. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, Peter, I was wondering, and what happened with the audience? I mean, I don't know if the audience actually at some point says to you, like, don't come back to Facebook because we are also angry, you know, as audience, maybe we are also angry because all the things that are happening here. And what do you say to them?
I think because this issue affected all types of news publishers and there was so much noise around that, my perception is that the kind of general public, the general Facebook user was pretty supportive of the media companies and didn't like what Facebook was doing. That's only my perception. I don't really have anything stronger than gut feeling to go on that. But I think, you know, people in general in Australia have a degree, not maybe the highest degree, but a degree of respect for the media and, you know, like the work that journalists do. So having that completely blocked from what is the biggest social network is not going to go down that well with the general public. And I think, you know, that kind of by proxy extends to fact checkers as well. Yeah,
and just to bring back Ellen from Philippines, she's has answered. She's saying, just to clarify, none of the IFCN accredited fact checkers, neither Verifiers nor Rappler in the Philippines, have been charged under the anti-terror law. But both, of course, have been accused by Duterte's government of being biased against him or their governments, right? So anything can happen anytime. And Helen, we are here for you. If you need any help, you can surely count on the IFCN. Peter, from Mexico to Australia, we're all here. And I want to come back to Diego. Diego also made a great comment here. I think hearing you, Peter, he's saying that if the bill goes ahead in Mexico, the way it's written in the telecom regulator gets that much power, maybe even fact checkers are at risk. And his advice, he's just jumping, I understand from your comment, Peter, is that fact checkers can't be, I'm reading out loud here, cannot be the hostages of big techs. And I think that's a very interesting point of view. I wonder if you agree. Tania, I would love to hear that idea of being hostages of tech companies from you. And there is one question I didn't see before. I'm sorry, Karina. Karina is asking about what are the main narratives with misinformation in digital platforms in Mexico, and how government's plans could affect the free speech. I know it's kind of broad, so two comments, Tania, to finish. We have 2 minutes left. What do you think about hostages, and what are the narratives around freedom of speech in Mexico?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I mean, the thing, as Diego mentioned, it's important. I mean, if we as fact checkers develop something, a social network, like to be in contact with our community, this state regulator will have power over this and decided if in which terms we actually can be close to our readers or not. So it's not only about Twitter or Facebook or big platforms, it's about everything on the internet, like actually works as social communication, with readers, with people, etc. Not only for journalists, not only for fact checkers, for an academic project, like to be in contact and to move on internet to have information or to communicate. So yes, I mean, it's huge to have this superpower state regulator. I agree with Peter in the thing that we cannot depend on only one social platform, that people actually, in fact, I think that people is actually asking us to do that, like to be multi-platform, multi-format, and to communicate in different ways. And about the what it's disinformation, misinformation in Mexico, well, we have a lot. I mean, of course, COVID, of course, vaccines right now. But for example, how government could affect free speech. This thing that I mentioned a lot about moral and good behavior, it's something that has history in Mexico. Like this argument has been used from years to put someone in jail or to in illegal ways, So right now, for example, if we publish something about right now in Mexico, there is a huge debate about a candidate that it's accused to be of being of sexual violence against a couple of women. If we publish something like that, maybe we can be accused of attack the moral of the good behavior because we are attacking against the image of this candidate because there is an investigation about this sexual abuse, but there is not a sentence yet. You know what I mean? So that's why I insist a lot about what is good behavior, what is morally correct to publish or not to publish, and how the government actually can use those arguments to attack freedom of speech.
Wow. Hey guys, it's 6:01 in Florida. Time for your breakfast, Peter, in Australia. And Tania, maybe what a margarita or something. That's a great time for that.
Yes.
So yes, let's finish this discussion. 1 minute for 30 seconds, Peter, to say goodbye, and 30 seconds, Tania. Let's start, Peter.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I'm really interested to hear everything Daniel was saying there and to get some perspectives from other places around the world. So thanks for having me.
And Tania, your turn.
Yes, thank you so much for this discussion. I think it's very important to be in touch all around the world about these regulation attempts. Thank you so much.
All right. So, well, this is the end of IFCN Talks second edition. I'm Tardáguila. I want to thank everyone that came here and everyone who will be watching this video on our YouTube channel. And this will be available tomorrow or the day after. So keep an eye on us and see you on IFCN Talks number 3. Bye.